Dolorous. Sad.
We were surprised when Ted's happy expression turned into a dolorous one.
Enervated. Worn out.
Enervated by his long walk, Jose took to his bed.
Suffrage. Right to vote.
The dictator lied when he claimed he favored suffrage for women.
Cabal. Secret group of plotters.
The members of the revolutionary cabal were arrested and jailed.
Odious. Despicable.
Sylvia's odious remarks caused the audience to turn against her.
To kill the goose that laid the golden egg. To spoil a good deal.
By being greedy, the accountant killed the goose that laid the golden egg.
Good news and bad. On Palm Sunday, April 9, 1865, General Ulysses S. Grant sent a terse dispatch to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. It contained the long-awaited sentence that the Confederate General Robert E. Lee had surrendered. The dolorous Civil War that had crippled the young nation was finally over. President Lincoln was only 56 at the time, but he looked 20 years older. The burden of being a wartime president had so enervated Lincoln that Surgeon General Barnes feared an imminent nervous breakdown. When Grant's news reached Lincoln, he went to the front windows of the White House and waved to the crowd below. He proceeded to make a brief speech about the problems of Reconstruction and advocated the granting of suffrage to Negro soldiers. Among the listeners was a Southern patriot, the popular actor John Wilkes Booth, almost as famous in the theater as his father, Junius. "That's the last speech he will ever make," said Booth to a fellow member of his cabal of conspirators. Booth's odious plan was to assassinate Lincoln, whom he hated passionately, while an associate, George Atzerodt, would do the same to Vice President Andrew Johnson.
Week 48, Day 2. Prescient. Able to predict.
Claiming to be prescient, the fortune teller took advantage of the gullible woman.
Verbatim. Word for word.
With remarkable talent, the reporter was able to quote speeches verbatim.
Reverie. Dream.
In her reverie, Ellen saw herself as the next U.S. president.
Thespian. Actor.
Yearning to be a thespian, Roger took lessons from a dramatic coach.
Despot. Tyrant.
When he lost control of the militia, the despot was forced to flee.
To carry coals to Newcastle. A waste of time.
Telling the racing car driver how to drive is like carrying coals to Newcastle.
The dreams of Lincoln and Booth. Lincoln's family and friends remembered that the president had a prescient dream in March, several weeks before the fatal day, and provided them with a verbatim account. He told of entering the East Room, in the White House, where a throng of people were gathered around an open coffin. In his reverie, Lincoln asked a soldier, "Who is dead in the White House?" "The president," was the reply. "He was killed by an assassin." Mrs. Lincoln said, "I'm glad I don't believe in dreams, or I should be in terror from this time forth." Lincoln's was the calming voice, "Let's try to forget it. I think the Lord in his own good time and way, will work this out all right." Of course, all who loved Abe Lincoln would have been deeply agitated, if they had known what John Wilkes Booth was planning. As a Southern secessionist, he despised the president. As a thespian, he romanticized the action that he could take to rid the nation of a cruel warmonger. Although he had not taken an active part in the Civil War, he was convinced that he could contribute to the Confederate cause by kidnapping the bearded despot. It wasn't exactly clear in his mind whether he would capture Lincoln and take him to Richmond, where he could be exchanged for Confederate prisoners of war, or whether he would just put a bullet in the president's head.
Week 48, Day 3. Pathological. Disordered in behavior.
The defense lawyer admitted that his client was a pathological liar.
Articulate. Well-spoken.
Hal was surprisingly articulate for a high school freshman.
Grandeur. Magnificence.
In history class, we studied the grandeur of Greece and the glory of Rome.
Polemic. Controversial argument.
The team captain's polemic led to a fist fight in the locker room.
Impasse. Deadlock.
The impasse was broken when the union agreed to management's offer.
An axe to grind. To pursue a selfish aim.
Senator Smith was in favor of the bill, but we knew that he had an axe to grind.
The assassins make ready. The pathological yet articulate Booth had rounded up several co-conspirators, and shared his delusions of grandeur with them. He had produced a polemic that convinced his crew that it would be a patriotic thing to capture the president. One of them was assigned to shut off the master gas valve at Ford's Theater when Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln were seated there at the play. With all the lights out, Booth would bind and gag the president. Two men would lower Lincoln onto the stage, and then carry him out the rear door, to a covered wagon waiting in the alley. They would head for Port Tobacco, and then ferry across the Potomac to their ultimate destination, Richmond, Virginia. Several dry runs had not worked out for the Cabalists, who were about to reach an impasse, when Booth learned that Lincoln would be celebrating General Grant's victories, with a party at Ford's Theater on the night of April 14th. He promised the small group that destiny was at hand. Their bold act, he said, would make their names famous forever in the annals of U.S. history. In the late afternoon of April 14th, Booth watched a rehearsal of the play that would be performed that evening. He had reviewed his action plan and the escape route, and he believed it to be foolproof. He mouthed the phrase he would use after killing Lincoln, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. The curtain was about to go up, on one of the darkest days in the country's history.
Week 48, Day 4. Regimen. A system of control.
Aunt Ethel's morning regimen called for 3 cups of coffee.
Denigrated. Defamed.
When her boss denigrated Martha's stenographic ability, she quit.
Guile. Trickery.
Using guile, the magician pulled the wool over the spectators' eyes.
Mortal. Leading to death.
The blow to the boxer's jaw turned out to be a mortal one.
Inflicted. Imposed upon.
The prison guards inflicted torture on some of the inmates.
To throw one's hat in the ring. To run for political office.
Before a gathering of the party's faithful, the local congressman threw his hat in the ring for the position of senator.
Now he belongs to the ages. At 8:25, the Lincolns arrived at the theater. When they entered booths 7 and 8, as regimen dictated, the band played Hail to the Chief. The 1675 members of the audience stood to honor the great man, and then the play commenced. It is reported that Booth said to a drunk, who had denigrated his acting skill, "When I leave the stage, I will be the most famous man in America." At about 10 p.m., with extreme guile, Booth had managed to be behind box 7 in the darkness of the hallway. He saw the silhouette of a head above the horsehair rocker. Derringer in his hand, he aimed it between the president's left ear and his spine. The shot was drowned out by laughter on the stage. Shouting revenge for the South, Booth climbed over the ledge of the box and jumped onto the stage, breaking his leg in the process. In pain, Booth limped out the stage door, where his horse was waiting, and made his getaway. Days later, however, he was cornered in a Virginia barn and shot. 3 of the cabal members were arrested and hanged. At the theater, a 23-year-old doctor attended to the wounded president. He found that the lead shot had lodged in Lincoln's brain, a bad sign. Several soldiers carried Mr. Lincoln across the street to a private house. His family physician came, and so did the Surgeon General. The president struggled throughout the long night, but it was apparent that a mortal wound had been inflicted, and he could not be saved. At 7:22 a.m., it was over. 2 silver coins were placed on the assassinated president's eyes. Then Secretary Stanton uttered the famous words, "Now he belongs to the ages."